Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Coming up on today's programme, world leaders urge restraint after Israel pounds Iran, killing senior figures and striking 100 targets, including nuclear and military sites. We ask, why now, and where could things head to from here? Hello and welcome to the programme. Israel launched a barrage of strikes across Iran in the early hours of this Friday morning, targeting nuclear facilities and missile factories. Israel also targeted and killed a number of key figures in the country, amongst them the Armed Forces Chief, Major General Mohammad Bugari, and the Revolutionary Guards Chief, Hossein Salami. Well, 6 nuclear scientists were also killed. Well, Washington says it had no part in the operation, but the US President Donald Trump says that his hope is to get back to the negotiating table. Well, on his Truth Social platform, President Trump added that there is still time to end the violence. That's what he said there. He said, just do it before it's too late. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that if Iran wasn't stopped, then the country could soon produce a nuclear weapon, and that this operation had been carried out to protect Israel from a future existential threat. Here's what he said.
Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. Last year, Iran fired 300 ballistic missiles at Israel.
The Israeli Prime Minister speaking there. Meanwhile, Tehran launched some 100 drones towards Israeli territory in retaliation. But Israel says that most of those drones were intercepted. While striking a defiant tone, the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said that his country would make Israel regret what he called its foolish actions.
The Iranian nation and its officials will not remain silent in the face of this crime, and the legitimate and powerful response of the Islamic Republic of Iran will deter the enemy from taking action. He will regret it. The security of the country will also act decisively.
Well, let's speak now to Mike Pompeo, who is the former US Secretary of State and the former director of the CIA under President Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Mr. Pompeo. Really appreciate it. You've been quoted as saying that the world is safer as a result of this Israeli attack on Iran. Could I just ask you, first of all, what your rationale was for that?
Yes, Tom, thanks for having me on. Look, it's safer not just as a result of the events of the last 24 hours, but if we think about the events that have taken place in the region in the last 2.5 years, I think it's undoubtedly the case the world is safer. Hezbollah is diminished, Hamas is at risk, the Houthis in Yemen are struggling, the regime in Syria has fallen, the air defense systems in Iran are virtually useless. And now the Israelis are undertaking an effort to push back the great threat to the region, which was a nuclear-armed Iran capable of leveraging and threatening every country, not just Israel, but the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, everyone with their continued efforts to be the world's largest state sponsor of terror. And now their capacity to do that is diminished, and the Iranian people have an opportunity. That makes the world a heck of a lot safer, in my judgment.
And what was your reaction when you first heard the news, presumably late last night US time or in the early hours of this morning? What were your initial thoughts and what did you read into the timing?
Well, we'd had some hint that the Israelis had reached the point where they believed that they no longer had optionality to wait. So you're always surprised in the moment. That is, you never know exactly when the strike is going to take place. But I've been convinced for a while that the Israelis believed that after what happened on October 7th and the continued progression of the enrichment processes inside of Iran, that they had no choice but to actually undertake something precisely along the lines we've seen. And then in the last hours, as we've begun to see reporting, some of which I'm sure will turn out to be not fully accurate, but we've seen a broad, deep, strategic campaign inside the heart of Iran. And the Iranian regime must surely be trying to figure their way through this. I hope they'll come to the conclusion that a negotiated solution is their best outcome, but I've seen no evidence of that to date. And so my instincts tell me the Israelis will continue this campaign until they have materially set back the capacity of Iran, not only to build a nuclear weapon, but to deliver it with ballistic missiles and to create a deterrence model that prevents Iran from ever thinking they can head back down that path again.
But for people who are watching, who are wondering, hang on a second, there were supposed to be some talks happening this weekend between the US and the Iranians, talks that are being hosted by Oman, a sixth round of talks. Why hit Iran now with that diplomatic process at such an advanced stage? Why not hold off?
Tom, my sense is that the talks weren't very advanced, that the Iranians had made utterly clear publicly that they weren't going to give up their capacity to enrich, a capability that the United States has made clear that we weren't going to let them have, and certainly the Israelis weren't. So, I think the discussions were useful to flesh out the Iranian intransigence, but I saw no signs that the conversations were actually going to change the direction and course of the regime. They were trying to drag this out. They were playing for time, hoping they got someone like President Biden back in office in a couple, 3 years. And so I think that combined with, I think Israel saw that while these conversations were going on, they were continuing to spin these centrifuges and continuing to work on their weaponization parts of their program, their nuclear program. I think the Israelis viewed the window as having closed, the opportunity for a negotiated solution at or near zero, and it was go time.
Your successor, the current US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, put out a statement in the early hours of this morning in which he said, quite explicitly, the US was not involved. He described Israel's actions as having been unilateral. I mean, it really did sound rather as though he was trying to put some distance between Washington and what had happened on Iranian soil. Why do you think he was doing that?
Oh, goodness. I think the United States in the first instance has the mission set to keep our own people safe. I remember how dangerous it was for our diplomats in the embassy in Baghdad. I'm sure he's trying to do the same for his team that's stationed across the world and the U.S. military that is stationed throughout the region as well. But if you read what President Trump has said in the hours following Secretary Rubio's statement, it's pretty clear that we were at least we at least didn't tell the Israelis not to do this. I think that's fundamentally different than what might have happened just a few months ago. And it was also noted by President Trump that America has some of the most amazing technology in the world. Some of that technology was on display. The Joint Strike Fighter was on display last night. And so I think Secretary Rubio was aiming to make clear to the Iranians, don't touch an American. If you do, there will be absolute hell to pay.
Okay, so to sum up the Trump administration's reaction to all of this, they say they were not involved, but they were not unaware. Could we therefore term this as being tacit approval?
Yeah, I think we can use whatever language we want, but yeah, I think it'd be fair to say that the United States did not put up a red light and tell the Israelis, no, let us continue to negotiate. I think we told them where we were in the conversations. We understood their interest and their concerns, and the Israelis, sounds like, informed the United States of their intent to conduct the mission set, and the United States did not come out publicly and say, no, we don't want them to do that. So describe it how you will.
Knowing as we do how difficult it is to strike a deal with the Iranians, a good deal on their nuclear program, do you think, looking back on it, it was an error to have torn up the so-called JCPOA deal that President Trump scrapped quite early on in his first presidency?
No, I think it was the absolute right decision. And indeed, I hope that the Brits or one of the E3 will actually go to the UN and put back in place the snapback sanctions. I think this is the maximal point to gain leverage on the Iranian regime to convince them to change their ways. So whether it's these kinetic strikes or particular cyber activities that may take place, or the economic pressure that can be put on Iran as a result of their decision to continue to build out a nuclear program, I think the decision President Trump made in May of 2018 to withdraw from the JCPOA which put Iran on the trajectory for guaranteeing that they had a nuclear weapon, was absolutely the right decision to get out of that transaction. I only wish President Biden had kept the pressure campaign on Iran and they hadn't had billions of dollars to conduct the terror in the region that they did during his 4 years, including one of the greatest massacres of modern times on October 7th of 2023.
So in terms of where we go to from here, the diplomatic process isn't dead. Indeed, President Trump has suggested that that is his preferred course of action. The military path is established now. Israel has let the genie out of the bottle there, and military action has been taken. There may be more to come. Do you think these two things can happen in parallel? Military action on the one hand, diplomacy on the other, and perhaps that might turn out to be the cocktail that leads to a productive and meaningful deal?
Tom, that's a great question. I pray it's so. The history is that if you negotiate and continue to impose costs on your adversary, you have more leverage and more opportunity to convince them of the basic thing we asked the Iranians to do. We haven't asked them to turn cartwheels or do something crazy. We've just said, behave like a normal nation. Stop killing people all across the world, including Americans. Stop firing ballistic missiles into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as they did in Abqaiq in 2019. Right? Stop that. Become a normal nation. We'll invite you back into the West. And so, yes, I am hopeful that what the Iranian regime is facing tonight, near collapse of the IRGC leadership team, senior leaders of their army gone, no one to be in command and control of their systems. Imagine the Ayatollah is feeling pretty isolated today, and I hope that will convince him to return to the negotiating table, but do so in good faith. I'm confident if he does that, President Trump will respond in good faith, as well as he has promised he would do.
Yeah, indeed. The Ayatollah must be feeling pretty isolated. I mean, difficult to imagine who might come to Iran's aid should it come to that. I mean, who might?
So that's a really important question. So think about who their friends are. The North Koreans, the Venezuelans, the Chinese Communist Party, and the Russians. I'll bet tonight the Russians and the Chinese are thinking, man, we picked the wrong horse in that region. We picked the losers, right? The Russians have been dependent on Iranian Shahed drones to continue their conflict in Ukraine. I doubt the export of drones into Russia is going to be, I bet it's not happening this afternoon. And so I don't know that there'll be anyone come other than oratorily. There'll be people speak out and say this shouldn't have happened or we're demanding peace. The United Nations has proven feckless once again. It just says, we want peace. Lay down your weapons, Iran, and Israelis would love to have peace alongside you, as would the leadership of every Gulf Arab state. But it's the Iranians that have continued to be aggressive. They're the ones that were building out a nuclear weapons program. And they're the only ones that can deliver peace to the region with a negotiated solution. The Israelis, I'm confident, would be prepared to accept that, but the Iranians show no evidence of it.
And just to wrap up this conversation, why is it so important? And what is your message to people who are wondering? Israel's allowed a nuclear weapon, we assume. Why shouldn't Iran have one? Why is it so important that Iran is never allowed to go nuclear?
Well, there are multiple reasons for that. The difference between Iran and Israel is that one is a law-abiding nation that cares about human beings and life and isn't conducting terror campaigns all across the globe and using its brute force to try and achieve its end objectives. That's what the Iranians are doing. One is a democracy. One is a tyranny bent on oppressing its own people. The second reason is if it was the case that the Iranians were permitted to have a nuclear weapon, I suspect that proliferation in the region would only expand. That is, many of the Gulf Arab states would feel compelled to do this because they too would feel threatened by Iran. This isn't just Iran going after the Jewish nation, it's going after its fellow Arabs as well. They feel threatened. I'll bet there in Dubai where you are and in the Gulf today, people are worried about what might happen in the next days, but they are incredibly hopeful that the Iranian regime will be absolutely crippled. And then finally, an Iranian regime with a nuclear weapon has enormous leverage, not only in the world and its ability to conduct terror, but also enormous leverage over its own people. And I'm convinced that the Iranian people would love to throw off the yoke of tyranny from this theocracy, this kleptocracy, and this may well just give them an opportunity to do so.
Just lastly and briefly, if you will, sir, are you concerned about escalation into a regional conflict here?
I think we have regional conflict. Right? I think the Iranians have been fighting in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank against decent people all across the world for decades. And so this has been, the Iranians are the ones that bring a regional conflict. If you ask, am I concerned about escalation? Always. But I would suggest to you that if history is any indicator, and it isn't always, there was a prediction that there would be World War III when President Trump decided to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. There was a similar prediction for decades that if the United States took strong action against Iran and took out their number 2 official, a gentleman named General Qasem Soleimani, that this would create global conflict, regional conflict. This would be a catastrophe. In each case, the Iranians backed down with relatively little response. They're weaker today than they were in each of those instances. I'd be surprised if they can do more than tactical responses. That doesn't mean they won't do bad things, that there won't be a cyber attack, that there won't be an assassination campaign somewhere in Europe or somewhere against Jewish people. It's possible. But if you ask, does Iran have the capacity to actually expand and escalate? I think they know that if they come after Americans, that will be the end. And if they escalate drastically, the whole world will see that they are, in fact, the bad actor that we've known them to be for the past decades.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you talking to us. Mike
Thank
Pompeo.
you very much, sir. You have a good day.
Thank you so much. Well, let's get more. We're going to speak now to Israel Ziv, who is a retired Major General and former head of the Israel Defense Forces Operations Directorate. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again here on Al-Arabiya English. I just want to start by asking you, what was your reaction when you received this news of those Israeli attacks across Iran?
Well, I think we were all expected that to take place. I think that the last 2 weeks were kind of build-up for that moment. Even if we were not sure about the exact time, I think we all understood that it's about to come. Let's put it this way. For Israel, this is a very good news, since the aspect of Iran getting nuclear, it's a very bad option. It's something that we cannot live the next day with that possibility. So overall, and with the hope of the right coordination with the U.S., I think it was a very blessed and very good decision to go on Iran nuclear, and not only nuclear.
Yeah, it's reported that Iran has approached the point of, quote, no return with regards to its development of a nuclear weapon. That almost sounds like it's too late, doesn't it? But is that based on very clear, very specific intelligence?
Look, the direction is very clear. And even if you cannot measure the exact step, it's very clear where they are going, and I think that they are rushing to achieve the nuclear, mainly because they lost all their defense layers, and we see that in actual life. At this time, if everything was normal, the Hezbollah was shooting at Israel and defending them, the Houthis and all the rest of the layers which they had before. And probably, or most probably, feeling naked without those defenses layers, they were rushing to get to this unreturned point. And I think that they were using to delay the negotiations in order to get there. And this is what we all understood.
Iran is warning of, quote, severe punishment for Israel. Already a number of drones have been fired in the direction of your country. Most of them, we understand, have been intercepted. But what sort of scenarios do you think Israel is preparing itself for?
Well, first of all, I think that the Iranian regime is in a huge problem. Mainly, facing internal problems because of the embarrassment, of the humiliation, mainly because of the surprise. It's not just the attack itself. You know, they were sleeping in their beds, or the number one leaders when Israel start this surprise attack. So I think that most of those threats are for internal use or internal purpose than you know, for Israel. Second issue, that Israel was attacking, first of all, and not just the key people, but all the retaliation option, not all of it, but big part of it. And I think that we see it in the last few hours, or since the attack started, that they don't succeed to shoot their missiles or anything massively. I'm not saying that this is, you know, the situation. I think we should expect ballistic missiles to be shot to Israel. But I think that we have quite a good defense system, and probably with the help of the Americans, and we don't see the sky are falling with that retaliation as they promise us.
Some people are drawing parallels between what Israel did in Iran last night and how Israel went about attacking Hezbollah. Do you think there are any parallels? Is there some sort of a comparison to be made here between the strategy, the military strategy that's been employed?
Yeah, I think it's a similar model, going on what we call the head of the snake, and opening with a surprise attack. This is key, especially when you're targeting people, and going on those people. It's very meaningful when you have a very concentrated system like Iran, like Hezbollah. Yes, they always have a replacement, but it's not the same, because it's not decentralized. It's very centralized system. So it's hitting their functioning, the retaliation, and I think this is what we see now. It's a lot of embarrassment. Yeah, they would function. It's a big country. They have alternative, but I think that the model so far is working for us. But it's you know, it's only the beginning, and it's going to last for the next days or weeks. It's not going to be short.
I remember at the end of last year, towards the end of last year, when Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, was killed, it was reported that some senior figures in Iran had gone into hiding because they feared they could be next. I mean, do you think Israel would go after the senior leadership in Iran if it could? Can Israel? Does it have the intel already?
Look, it's very much depend on you know, on the development of this war, and it is a war. At this time, I think that the idea is to go only on the military and nuclear. But if Iran will choose to enhance the war and attack massively civilian targets in Israel, Israel might consider that. Yeah, it's an option.
And what is the secret to Israel's success these last 12 months or so when it comes to intelligence? I mean, it's been remarkable. Even people who don't support Israel would say, you know, we have to hand it to you. Your intel has been extremely successful and extremely impressive. What is the secret to this?
I would say a lot of hard work and daring to go much further and do the impossible, because our enemies are not stupid, and they don't like to be victims of our intel or our hands. But I think that, you know, some extra hours of thinking out of box and creating the very exact scenarios, because it's not just an opportunistic attack. Every element, every target here has a place in our plan in order to paralyze the system, to prevent them to retaliate, and to achieve maximum impact. So it took years to build it. It's not like instant. So I think, yes, it's intelligence, but it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and of course, Iran...
And good technology, I would say so also, yeah.
Right, so hard work and technology, you're saying. Iran has a much larger army than Israel, and yet it doesn't seem to have the upper hand. Do you think it's the intel that gives Israel the upper hand here?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we don't have actually any interest in the army of Iran. It's about the Revolutionary Guard. This is the main problem. These are the ones to export the revolution. These are the ones, to go and build Hezbollah and support the Houthis and the other proxies and the terror around the world. So definitely targeting them, it's a great achievement by itself. And I think that it's going to, the impact, going to put Iran in the right proportion. But it's not just here in the Middle East. It's going further. We have to remember that Iran is a great supporter of Russia in the war of Ukraine. And I think some of the impact is going further than here.
And where do you see this heading to from here? What are your sort of forecasts as to how events unfold moving forward? You've talked about a time frame. You've said it could be days, could be weeks. What sort of a time frame are we looking at?
I would say, very carefully, it is not less than few weeks. And I think also we can expect from the US to reconsider their approach, the political approach, because I think it will be kind of a miss to go back to the same agreement, because the situation has changed this evening. And I think that the American can go for a totally different political agreement with them, and even to consider to go along with Israel and bring further more results to weaken Iran. And then I think they are in a good way or in a good position to achieve not just nuclear, but to reduce the power of Iran or the impact of Iran in terms of terror, in terms of exporting the revolution. And I think that the Americans would consider that.
Do you think we're looking at a prolonged, long drawn out conflict here, one that could even spread across the region?
I think it's look, the risk for escalation is there, but I think it's limited. It's more limited than what we think, because it's not the same thing as Iran, half a year ago or a year ago. So I think that we are not going to be the whole area, burning or something of that kind. But yes, it's just the beginning. We have to, to watch the next days and see where things are going.
Just lastly, very briefly, is there a sense of panic in Israel right now? I mean, there are reports that supermarket shelves are quite empty. I mean, are people in Israel concerned about the direction in which things are heading?
No, it's not a panic, but people, they have that nature of just in case. So, they go and just in case, buy more cheese, more bread, and that. I don't see any panic in Israel, but yes, people understand that it might take several weeks, and it's about their food. But I don't think that there is panic in Israel.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, retired Major General.
Thank you, Tom.
Israel's. Thank you for your time. We can cross now to Jasmine El-Gamal, who is a former US Pentagon advisor for the Middle East, who joins us from London. Jasmine, always a pleasure having you on the programme. Can I just start by asking you, what were your initial thoughts when this news was delivered to you of those overnight strikes?
I was surprised at the timing, to be honest with you. I wasn't surprised at the extent of the damage that Israel did, because I knew, and I think we all knew, who have been following this, that if Israel were to strike another blow against Iran, that it would try to go for the nuclear facilities, because it's done everything else before: military facilities, leaders, Iranian leaders, Hamas leaders. And so really striking at the heart of Iran's nuclear program was the only thing that was left for them to do. And this has been a long-standing goal of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has been saying for years that Iran poses an imminent threat to Israel and that its nuclear sites had to be dismantled by force. So that wasn't a surprise to me. The timing of it was a surprise to me because of the diplomacy that had been going on between the Trump administration and Iran, and the fact that Steve Witkoff, the special envoy to the Middle East, was supposed to be meeting with the Iranian foreign minister in Oman on Sunday. And even though the two parties still appear to be a ways apart in terms of what they wanted to get out of the deal, negotiations were ongoing. And I spoke to several contacts who had close knowledge of the negotiations, and they said that they believed that all of the parties were negotiating in good faith. So to have the Israelis strike now when those diplomatic channels were still not completed, that was a surprise to me.
So knowing what we know now, and we've had 12 hours or so to digest this news, I mean, what was, do you think, Israel's thinking in carrying out these attacks when, as you say, the wheels are in motion? More talks were supposed to be happening in Oman on Sunday. So what do you think they were thinking?
Well, there are two schools of thought on this right now. I'll tell you the first one, even though I don't agree with it, which is that this was the plan all along, that the whole Trump and Netanyahu rift was just manufactured in order to provide a huge element of surprise to Iran when Israel finally did the strikes against it. That even some people are saying that the negotiations in Oman through the Omanis were just a ruse to make Iran feel comfortable, let down its guard so that the Israelis could go in and attack. I don't believe that. But I do think that we are now at a moment, a really critical moment, where the US and Israel and indeed Iran are going to have to figure out how to get out of this mess. What is the off-ramp here? Now, the Iranians are going to be thinking about how to respond. And they don't have many options, to be honest with you. Their defenses have been weakened. Their offensive capabilities have been weakened. Their strategic depth in the region has been weakened because of how Hezbollah and Hamas have been decimated over the last year. So in terms of direct retaliation, they may be thinking about how to retaliate against the Israelis. They may be thinking how to retaliate against the Americans. But at the end of the day, they just don't have that much, whether it's manpower at the leadership level or physical military capability. And so the third option would be to kind of step back, go underground, and try to rush as fast as possible to get to that nuclear capacity, because not all of their nuclear sites were hit in yesterday's strike. And so they might see that the only way out for them, other than completely capitulating, is racing towards that nuclear weapon. So it's really, we'll have to see what the next hours and days bring, but Iran's options are limited.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at your Twitter feed before we crossed to you, or rather I should say your X feed. And one of the things you point to is, of course, that there was a deal between Iran and pretty much the rest of the world with regards to its nuclear ambitions, the so-called JCPOA. You say that President Trump pulled out of that whenever it was 7-8 years ago, out of spite. And what we're seeing now are talks aimed at bringing about another deal with Iran, which has proven extremely difficult. Do you think, with the passage of time, it looks like an error to have torn up that agreement? And how different do you think a new agreement could or would be were they able to strike one with Iran?
Look, I mean, there were definitely criticisms of President Obama's Iran deal. The fact that it only focused very tightly on the nuclear file and didn't address any of Iran's activities in the region, its support for Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and so on. And I think that's very fair criticism. But the fact is, if you focus on the nuclear issue, it was a deal that actually got Iran to come into the fold and be more transparent than it had been previously. And when Trump came in and tore up the deal, Iran went back to being more opaque, to starting to violate some of those agreements. And that made Israel very uncomfortable. But the fact is, Iran wasn't the one to leave that deal. It remained in the deal. and Trump was the one who left. And now that he was trying to get back to a deal, and this is why I don't quite believe this conspiracy theory that this was all planned and that the whole Trump-Netanyahu rift has been a ruse. I do believe that the Trump administration was trying to reach a deal with Iran on their own terms. Trump wanted to be the one to get that deal. He wanted to be the one to say, I got a better deal than Obama. We know that that's how he operates. So I do believe that he was his intention was to get a deal. But of course, the US presidency and international affairs in general is never about just one actor, even if that actor is the US president. There were forces within the administration, the neocons, the Iran hawks, that had been working with the Israelis to try to create that momentum for a strike. And like I said, I think those who are focused on trying to strike Iran's nuclear capabilities saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that Iran has been severely weakened, its proxies have been weakened, now is the time to do it, it's now or never.
How fragile do you think the leadership in Iran is looking right now, and how vulnerable do you think they're feeling, knowing as they do that Israel seems to have a pretty good track record of working out who's where and then taking corresponding action?
That's right. I mean, Tom, without a doubt, Israel has proved what it has proved, even if you don't agree, which I don't, with their tactics and their strategies. It has proved undeniable dominance militarily and in terms of intelligence vis-a-vis the Iranians, vis-a-vis really anyone in the region by far. And so I think the Iranians are feeling completely, I imagine, stunned right now. Of course, they always knew that this would be a possibility. They had to have known that this was a possibility. And in that sense, they may have really overplayed their hand in these negotiations with Donald Trump. They saw that the US administration was willing to make a deal or to enter into negotiations, and they should have just taken a deal. But they sort of held off. They tried to get the best deal they could. And I think they missed that moment, at least for the time being. They now have to scramble to figure out how to proceed. They are very thin when it comes to personnel, people who can actually make decisions about the next step moving forward. And I can imagine that they're feeling really, really cornered right now. And what I worry about is that an actor that feels this cornered is going to just lash out, feel like it has nothing left to lose, and that could end up being really dangerous.
Right. I mean, we're talking about two countries here, Iran and Israel, that are somewhat isolated on the world stage. I mean, both of them. Many analysts we've spoken to have said that Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel looks pretty isolated, and his position looks vulnerable too. And as you say, when you look at all the other factors in the equation, I mean, we're talking about a very unpredictable situation here, aren't we?
Extremely unpredictable, extremely scary. I mean, I think all the time about people who live in the region who have to worry about what the next conflict will be and where the next strikes will come from. I mean, this is not a sustainable way for people to live in the region. And it's also not sustainable for long-term stability or security, because every time you have something like this happen, there's always that risk of miscalculation that ends up spiraling completely out of control and taking the whole region along with it. And that remains a really, really high risk. The fact is that when you look at the history of the Middle East, it's never really been the case. At least I can't think of a case where an issue or a challenge that has been resolved with brute force rather than diplomacy has ended up actually working out in the long term, rather than creating more and more problems down the road. And so what I would hope, and I think we still haven't seen the end of this Israeli strike on Iran, and we certainly haven't seen the Iranian response fully yet, but I would hope that in the next few days, that, cooler heads prevail. I don't know where those cooler heads are, to be honest with you. I'm at a loss. But I do hope that cooler heads somewhere can prevail and try to get that diplomacy back on track, because otherwise I do fear that we're entering just a whole different level of violence and chaos in the Middle East that people can ill afford.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you talking to us. Jasmine El-Gamal, thank you. Well, let's bring into the conversation now Aniga Mortavi, who is an Iranian-American journalist and host of the Iran podcast. She joins us from Washington. Thank you very much for being with us. How significant a blow was dealt to Iran in the early hours of this morning?
I think it was significant, and it came also with a lot of shock. So the element of surprise was also important. Both the government or the regime and also the population seemed to be in absolute shock. And the level of this destruction and the number of people targeted and the locations targeted and the extent of the operations, it all seems to be, it was very extensive. So I think it came with a lot of surprise and also a lot of destruction. I spoke to people on the ground in Iran who woke up in the middle of the night in absolute horror, hearing explosions, the ground shaking, jets flying overhead, and many people essentially being not so far away from these locations that were targeted in their neighborhoods, around the corner from where they live. It was just a very, very significant night.
And in terms of precedent, probably the most significant attack since the 1980s when Iran was at war with Iraq, or even more significant than that. What are your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. The last time Iranians remember anything like this, I also grew up, I was a child in that era, were the bombings of the 1980s war between Iran and Iraq, especially towards the end when the bombing of the city started. And sort of this kind of reminded of the horror of that era, of eventually running to bunkers and shelters, and the destruction that would come after it. So yes, absolutely. And having the capital, Tehran, many locations being attacked and bombed at the same time, this has been unprecedented since the 1980s.
Let's talk about some of the individuals who were targeted. We've got the leader of the paramilitary Revolutionary Guard, General Mohammad Bugari. There's also Hossein Salami, who is the he's the leader of the Revolutionary Guard, and the chief of staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, General Mohammad Bugari. Those two killed, along with 6 nuclear scientists and a number of other senior figures in the Iranian leadership. I mean, certainly on the military side. Who stands out for you as being the most significant of the people who were targeted?
Maybe Salami, as well as the other commanders, their killing would be a major blow to the overall Iranian armed forces and defense strategy moving forward. This also, let's not forget, this comes on the following, first of all, the assassination of the Iranian top general in 2020 under the first Trump administration, General Soleimani back then, and then also in the past 2 years, major blows to Iran's allies, network of allies, the axis of resistance across the region, Hezbollah, Hamas, the militias in Iraq. So the overall blow is going to be very serious to Iran, both as far as their strategic depth that they saw in the region with their allies, their forward defense strategy, which was sort of that network, and also the fall of Assad in Syria, of course, Iran's close state ally in the region. But then now domestically, inside the country, with the homeland being attacked and with these commanders being killed in their homes with their families, this is very unprecedented. It's a major blow to Iranians, and I just don't know if they have a lot of good options in front of them after this.
Yeah, it's a psychological blow as well to the leadership in Iran to know that Israel from far away is able to, through pressing a few buttons, target and kill some very senior figures. Do you think that's got the leadership all the way at the top feeling extremely vulnerable and perhaps rather nervous about their own futures?
Well, it must have. They're not showing it. I mean, the system is showing some level of continuity. They're talking about retaliation and Israel paying back for this. But obviously, there must be stress and worry at the top levels. But I also want to reiterate that Iran is a large nation state. This is not a militia. We're not talking about Hezbollah, because I've seen comparison being done, for example, with Hezbollah or with Hamas. This is not that. This is not, we're not dealing with a paramilitary as part of a country. This is the actual nation state. It's a large country. At the end of the day, with a big population, the central government has a certain level of strength. There's all kinds of armed forces. It's not just these individuals. They have been quickly replaced. So I think as again, a country, as a nation state, they will be able to sort of recuperate and continue and collect themselves. We've seen the retaliation already started with the drones flying towards Israel, etc. But I think the main issue here, if we look at the big picture also, is the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks that were ongoing. The next round was scheduled for this Sunday. This was an attempt at sabotaging diplomacy also. It looks like a military operation, but the Israeli Prime Minister has been trying to sabotage nuclear diplomacy since the Obama era and now under Trump. And he saw this opportunity, this window of opportunity, and this was the best way to essentially launch a military operation to be able to at the same time hit these targets, but also hit diplomacy, which I think was the main target.
Yeah, well, it remains to be seen what becomes of those talks. But just going back to the domestic situation in Iran, because over the last few years, I mean, every journalist in the world has covered a number of stories where there have been chapters of, considerable unrest in Iran. There must be a number of citizens in Iran who are perhaps hoping these events will lead to the downfall of the leadership. I mean, do you think there will be people who see this as an opportunity to domestically to perhaps start thinking about some new leaders for the country?
I mean, a good portion of the population is very angry at the status quo, at the form of governance. As you said, we've seen protests after protests, bloody, deadly protests, and with lots of grievances that the government hasn't responded to, economic, political, social. But I just don't know if this is a very realistic view for Israeli military strikes. We can still call them surgical. This is not a full-on invasion, boots on the ground in the country. With these kind of military operations to bring any form of regime change or stability or more democracy to the country, the only thing this will bring is more instability, potentially more domestic unrest that can turn into civil wars, as we've seen in the neighboring countries. And then if we're talking about a full-on regime change, something that the closest example would be, for example, Iraq and Afghanistan, that came after boots on the ground, full-on invasions of the country by the U.S. military. And even those didn't turn out as they were desired or suggested or promised before. We saw what happened in Afghanistan after 20 years. We see what's happening in Iraq, the instability across the region that came from those wars. So some Iranians are angry. We even see some sort of showing joy at the killing of some of these commanders. But at the same time, this is their livelihoods. If you live in the country, I've spoken to many people who are in absolute horror. At the end of the day, these are Iranian cities. These are not Islamic Republic cities. When someone has bombed a neighborhood, in your neighborhood, a house in your neighborhood, or in your own building. So, for example, I saw reporting of a unit that was hit, but then because of a gas leak, the fire spread to other units in that apartment that weren't the primary target. So things in a war can go wrong in an escalation, and the civilians will pay the price. And I think that's the understanding among the majority of Iranians, especially now that they're seeing the horror of these attacks and explosions, and also the memories that came with them from the 1980s war with Iraq.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. But thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us, Aniga Mortavi. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Fred Fleitz, who is the former Executive Secretary and Chief of Staff of the United States National Security Council under President Trump. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again here on Arabiya English. Let me just start by asking you, what was your reaction to this news when you heard about it, presumably late last night, US time?
Well, I was surprised. I think the whole world was surprised. Iran has counted on the ability to stave off criticism in international forums or attacks as long as it is involved in some kind of international negotiations. And it's an expert at dragging these talks out. And I don't think anyone thought that Israel would stage an attack while negotiations with the U.S. were ongoing, and when another round of these talks was scheduled for this weekend.
Indeed, talks supposed to happen on Sunday. I mean, do you think this perhaps means those talks can't go ahead?
It looks that way because Iran is claiming that the U.S. was working with Israel on this attack, even though President Trump has said that the U.S. was not. I think the U.S. Didn't give Israel a red light for the attack. And I think President Trump has been pretty clear right now that Iran had a choice 60 days ago to make an agreement that would stop an attack like this, and it chose not to do so.
Yeah, I mean, we heard the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio using words like not involved, and these were unilateral attacks carried out by Israel. It sounded a bit like he was trying to put some pretty clear distance between Washington and what happened on Iranian soil. What were your thoughts on that?
I think there's a difference of opinion between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's a friendly difference on how to deal with Iran. Netanyahu has no time for diplomacy. He thinks the Iranians are simply not interested in talking. They just want to buy time to further develop their nuclear weapons and missile programs. But Trump believes in diplomacy and wants to avoid new wars. And he really did want to go through a diplomatic process to try to resolve this. Now, Trump has made statements recently that these talks weren't going anywhere because Iran was not negotiating in good faith. And I think Trump was moving towards very tough sanctions, maybe military action, but we'll never know.
Yeah, indeed. We heard President Trump, we read President Trump on Truth Social saying, 2 months ago, I gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal. They should have done it. Today is day 61. I told them what to do, but they just couldn't get there. Now they have perhaps a second chance. What does he mean by a second chance? I mean, they've just been pounded by Israel. What does a second chance look like?
Well, I mean, Iran says it wants a peaceful nuclear program. Trump said, okay, you can have one. We'll have a consortium so you can import nuclear fuel, and they already import nuclear fuel rods for the Bashir power reactor. They can easily import nuclear medicines. That's an agreement that would allow Iran to, and we could even give them fuel for research reactors, small fuel plates for research reactors. That's all doable. If Iran really wants a peaceful nuclear program, we'll help them get one. And we could incorporate Iran into the global community. You know, Trump made the point in his recent trip to Saudi Arabia. He wants to promote peace through strength and commerce. Iran could be prosperous by striking a deal with Trump instead of being bombed and having their military facilities destroyed by Israel.
I mean, Iran cuts a very lonely figure on the world stage, a very lonely nation. I mean, who's going to come to Iran's aid? And let's not forget, Iran hasn't got those powerful friends in the form of Hezbollah, and it doesn't really have, and it doesn't have Syria as its friend really anymore either.
Iran has some alliances and supporters, but they're not going to step into this battle. Russia and China aren't going to step in. But Hezbollah is an interesting question because you know, over the last few years, I don't think Israel wanted to conduct an attack like this because it worried that Hezbollah fighters would come over the border and there'd be a ferocious missile attack by Hezbollah. Well, Israel's basically wiped Hezbollah out, and it's said over the last 12 hours or so that it is not involved in this fight.
Is this a blow to Russia, do you think, in any respect, given that, let's face it, Russia's war in Ukraine relies quite heavily on munitions that are supplied by Iran, and you know, this is another ally and friend that seems to be in a state of duress right now. Do you interpret this as being an indirect blow to Russia?
I think it definitely is, because Russia's relying on drones that are being made in Iran, and Iran also was going to buy new nuclear reactors from Russia. But with this destruction to its nuclear program, I think that whether that will continue is really up in the air.
Just going back to the negotiations, I mean, President Trump was, after all, the US president who scrapped the Iran nuclear deal and now wants another one. I mean, do you think with the passage of time and with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been better if that Iran nuclear deal had not been scrapped?
No, that deal in 2015, which I call the Obama nuclear deal, was a terrible agreement. It did little to stop Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons. There's substantial evidence that Iran was cheating on the agreement. And we can see that by how fast Iran ramped up its uranium enrichment program under the Biden administration. Iran was secretly working on advanced centrifuge technologies throughout the time it was a party to the JCPOA. The agreement was a fake, it was a fraud, and Trump was right to withdraw from it.
Just looking at the fact that these attacks took you say, somewhat by surprise. I mean, there were just looking at the warning signs, if there were any. I mean, I don't know what you think of this, but we were talking about US diplomatic missions being evacuated in the last 36 hours on this channel. I mean, do you think some of the warning signs were there? Do you think it was obvious that something was about to happen?
There were warning signs, but there's often warning signs that something may happen that doesn't. This was different in many ways. First of all, the Israelis led the Iranians to believe that the attack wasn't imminent. And then there were ongoing negotiations. But there's also the issue that in the previous two attacks against Iran, they were retaliation for Iranian attacks. Israel did not initiate an attack. So it could be that Iran didn't expect that Israel would ever do this.
Okay, so do you think it's fair to say the US was not involved but not unaware? Do you think that would sort of sum it up?
I mean, I'm told that the US was not involved, and I understand that US officials were aware the attack was about to take place. Okay,
and just lastly, where do you see things heading? I mean, do you think there is the real risk of escalation here?
I think the global community has to stand behind Israel here because Iran was enriching to 60% uranium-235. No peaceful uses. It could fuel 9 to 10 nuclear weapons. This was a huge threat to regional and global security. And I think Israel did the world a favor. Let's stand with Israel and let's pressure the Iranian government to agree to a peaceful way out of this and not to lash out with missile attacks and terrorist attacks, because that's just going to result in more misery for the Iranian people.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Fred Fleitz, always a pleasure talking to you.
Good to be here.
Well, let's bring into the conversation Sir Simon Gass, who is the former British ambassador to Iran and the former chair of the UK Joint Intelligence Committee. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Arabiya English. Let me just start by asking you this. Why do you think Israel decided to carry out these attacks on Iran at this particular moment?
Well, I think there were probably three main components to the answer, Tom. The first is that Israel, I think, has been itching to take military action against Iran for some time, judging that Iran is probably today in a weaker position than it has been for many years, because effectively its proxy Lebanese Hezbollah in Lebanon has been decapitated last year by Israeli action. Secondly, Iran has lost its key regional allies in the Assad regime in Syria. And thirdly, because previous Israeli strikes last October went quite a long way to damaging sections of Iran's air defense and therefore left it more vulnerable, and that was a vulnerability that could close. I think the second reason is that Iran's nuclear program has been forging ahead in some important ways. It's worth remembering that the US intelligence community has been briefing out to people that it doesn't think that Iran has a program to develop a nuclear weapon at present, but nevertheless, a number of the capabilities which you would need if you wanted to do that have been moving ahead quite fast. And thirdly, I think that Israel was content, rather reluctantly perhaps, to give a chance to US-Iranian negotiations on the nuclear deal, of which we've already had 5 rounds, but has probably judged, and the US may also have judged, we don't know, that those negotiations were unlikely to be successful. So I think for all of those reasons, Israel chose this moment to strike.
Yeah, and you mentioned the perceived weakness of Iran at this particular moment? I mean, you were ambassador there. I should just add for our viewers' benefit between the years 2009 to 2011. But some of those same faces, notably the Ayatollah, will still be the ones that were around when you were based in Tehran. How vulnerable do you think the leadership in Iran actually is right now? I mean, given that some major figures have been assassinated in the last 24 hours, I mean, do you think there could even be an appetite on Israel's part to go for the people at the very, very top?
Well, that isn't something which Israel appears to have done so far. It's focused on military leaders and nuclear scientists, clearly to make any Iranian retaliation more complex, because you've effectively taken out 2 or 3 of the top military officers in the country, but also to create in Iran a sense of vulnerability. I think that's true. I don't believe, though, at the moment that Israel has taken action which is very clearly designed to try to topple the Iranian regime or anything of that sort. I think this is firmly based on Iran's nuclear and military capability.
And to what extent do you think Israel's been successful in addressing that threat with these attacks? I mean, has the threat been eliminated as far as you're concerned from what we know, from what we've seen in terms of the sites that were targeted by carrying out those attacks in the early hours of this morning?
Tom, I think it's probably too early for us to tell for sure how successful Israel has been in the attacks that it launched. I'm in little doubt that Israel will not want to end its campaign against Iran until it's achieved success in its military goals, which are likely to be a substantial degradation both in Iran's nuclear capability, but also in its long-range strike capacity and therefore its ability to hit back at Israel. So I think we must expect that the attacks we saw earlier today are not the end of the story. And of course, we also have to factor in that Iran will itself undoubtedly respond at some point in the future. That may not be immediately. It may take a while for that to materialize. But I think that will be another turn of the handle when we get to that point.
Both in the United Kingdom and in the US, there's an argument that's often made in Israel's defense, namely that Israel has the right to defend itself. Do you agree that Israel, by carrying out those attacks on Iran this morning, was acting in self-defense?
Well, that's clearly something for lawyers to argue about, whether this is justified in terms of self-defense. I think what we can say is that Israel has always seen the possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat against the country, and therefore has over many years undertaken military and intelligence action against Iran and against the nuclear program, which it would no doubt brigade under the heading of self-defense. So that is clearly a view which Israel has.
And the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has been urging restraint. His Cobra group, the emergency meeting, has been taking place this afternoon. I mean, beyond words, what do you think the UK could or might do in this particular situation?
Well, I think, firstly, the United Kingdom will be speaking to Israel and indeed, of course, to the United States. And of course, restraint is the word that they will be using. I'm not sure, though, that under present circumstances, the United Kingdom view will carry a great deal of weight with Israel. They have taken their decision and they are going to carry it out no matter what. I think the UK may have a bigger role to play once the initial shooting stops and the question re-emerges as to whether any sort of negotiation with Iran on the nuclear program is possible. At the moment, that does not look at all likely, but the future is uncertain. It's also just worth noting that the United Kingdom has a stake in this because, of course, unlike the United States and unlike Israel, the United Kingdom has an embassy in Tehran, an embassy which I used to lead many years ago, which itself can be vulnerable when you get waves of anger in Tehran. There is no American embassy to demonstrate outside, there is no Israeli embassy to demonstrate outside, and therefore that can land on the United Kingdom's door. The UK also, of course, has personnel and citizens throughout the neighbourhood, particularly in the Gulf, and will be wanting to do everything which it can to safeguard those people.
And speaking of embassies, I mean, we were discussing yesterday the news on this channel that the United States had decided to evacuate some of its diplomatic missions around the region in the last 24, 36 hours. I mean, do you see a pattern? That's not a coincidence, is it?
No, I mean, I think it's pretty clear, including from what President Trump has said, that the United States had forewarning of these Israeli attacks and therefore chose to reduce its footprint in the region, particularly in places where they might be vulnerable, such as Baghdad, where, as you know, there are significant Shia Iran-aligned militias present. So that is clearly a decision which the US took to try to reduce its vulnerability. All of that said, my assessment is that Iran is likely to do everything which it can to avoid further antagonizing the United States so as to avoid a situation in which Iran finds itself facing not only a very capable Israeli military, but also a very capable and large US military at the same time. Now, whether that containment will prove possible if this situation goes on for a long time remains to be seen. But I think that that will be Iran's goal.
And just lastly, I dug out an article written in the Times by William Hague, who was the British Foreign Secretary and leader of the Conservative Party for a time. And he wrote this article in the context of the 7th of October attacks. And he said, Iran, feeling sidelined by a Middle East increasingly focused on modernization, economic growth and cooperation with Israel, gave its backing, just to paraphrase him, to the Hamas attacks of the 7th of October. Do you think that's what it is? Do you think Iran here feeling extremely left behind by the rest of the region and it's sort of having a last attempt at trying to sort of make its mark on the region? I mean, what do you make of those comments by William Hague? Do you think they're still relevant 2 years on?
No, I don't really think that's the case at all. Iran has for many years operated what I would describe as a policy of forward defence, in which you try to engage with your adversaries as far away from Iran's national borders as possible. And that has meant that Iran has supported and trained and funded a range of groups, many of which use pretty unsavoury tactics, such as Lebanese Hezbollah. Hamas was in a slightly different category in that I've no doubt Iran has given support from Hamas, but Hamas was never an organisation that danced to Iran's tune. No, I think that if you look at the way in which Iran has tried to improve its relations with its Gulf neighbours in recent years, including Saudi Arabia, of course, what we're seeing is an Iran which recognises that the region is changing, as you say, and it needs to maintain a stake in that process. But I don't think that that has particularly led it to a more aggressive stance. Indeed, I think if you look at what Iran has done since those dreadful attacks on the 7th of October, on the whole, it's tried to stay out of it as much as it can, but has sometimes felt the need to respond to particular actions by Israel, which Iran judges to be escalatory.
OK, well, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. Sir Simon Gass, former British ambassador to Iran. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, for more, we can speak to Thomas Pickering, who is the former US ambassador to Israel and former US ambassador to the United Nations. He joins us from Virginia. Ambassador Pickering, always a pleasure talking to us. And I just wanted to start by asking you, first of all, how dangerous of a situation do you think the world finds itself in this Friday?
Tom, it's hard, I think, at this point to be precise, but it's a very important question. And adding another potential full-scale conflict with the use of heavy drones and 200 aircraft to the other two conflicts that are going on between Russia and Ukraine and Israel and the Palestinians over Gaza is not a comforting prospect, one that raises the issue of the question of accidents, mistakes, misjudgments, and misperceptions of how and in what way the question can be dealt with. The notion that force is the ultimate resolver of all these conflicts is something that I think has been disproved time and time again. And certainly force at this stage does not seem to be adding to diplomatic potency. The president had made statements that he, I believe, thought would help in once again engaging Iran. The view is that from the press reports that the meeting won't take place on Sunday. I hope it does. I think it's important to move in that direction. But all of this adds up to instability and uncertainty, beginning obviously with the oil patch, but going beyond that. And some have even threatened or at least moved down the road of alluding to the fact that nuclear use might actually be engaged. A dangerous and I think careless invitation to catastrophe, and we ought to be very, very careful about that.
Indeed, and we've had guests who've told us on this channel that boxed into a corner, there's no telling what the Iranian leadership might choose to do. I mean, what actual options do you think they have?
Well, they have the options of continue to try a conventional riposte, attack the U.S. position. 40,000 people in the Middle East is not a trivial presence in any way at all. The president, I think quite rightly, has warned them against doing that. We have tried to maintain that we were not involved in the attacks, although it was quite clear we were aware of the attacks, and it was quite clear that we have been the traditional military and political supporter of Israel, and Iran is finding it obviously hard to ignore that in terms of the exchange of threats that has been going on over the last 12 hours.
Just in terms of where things could head to from here, and I just want to ask you as well in terms of the timing of all of this. These are sort of areas I'd like to explore. Let's talk about the timing first. I mean, we're being told that Iran was about to reach the point of no return when it came to developing nuclear weaponry. I mean, do you believe that intel to be credible?
I have no basis for evaluating it. In terms of the passage of time and the progress that Iran has made, it is difficult to say that it's entirely off the charts and couldn't happen. I think that it is potentially a realistic conclusion, but I would want to see the data before I jumped to that conclusion.
Okay, I mean, this does raise some questions. I mean, some people will be hopeful that the Iranian leadership is looking perhaps more vulnerable than it has done at any other time in recent memory. I mean, do you buy into that? Do you think that the Iranian leadership is on borrowed time?
The Iranians have not in any way at all indicated that the decimation of their leadership produces compliance with international law and standards, quite the other way around. And they have already voiced a number of serious threats about the actions they will take against Israel and in a couple of cases against the United States, despite the fact that we have sought quite actively to separate ourselves, although recently the president has declared that this was an excellent move, whatever he means by that, by Israel.
I mean, has Iran ever shown, do you think, genuine willingness to strike a genuine deal? And you know, on the subject of the JCPOA, which President Trump did away with, I mean, many observers didn't think that was a genuine deal. It wasn't a good deal. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, Many observers thought that they could procure a better one. They haven't so far. And my view was that it was a helpful deal and a useful deal, and that Iran was living up to the deal according to the monitoring that had been conducted both by us unilaterally and by the United Nations, and that it was not a wise move, if I could phrase it diplomatically, to withdraw from that deal under the expectation that you could, in a very short space of time, produce a miraculous, much better deal.
So do you think if that deal was still active, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today? I mean, very hard to say, but...
Oh, very hard to say that, Tom. I think we would have been at a starting point that was more advantageous to peace, security, stability, and safety than we are now.
Okay, now turning our eye to where do we go to from here. Is there a country, or are there countries, that can perhaps get both sides sitting around a table that both sides would listen to? What are the diplomatic options?
I think the diplomatic options begin this afternoon, 3 o'clock in the United Nations Security Council. The Council has been in a very difficult position in recent months with serious disagreements based on differences over different conflicts. I cannot believe that sensible people in Russia and China, as well as in Britain and France, would not wish to join us, and that we should be there in seeking an effort in the Security Council of unanimity in favor of a resolution that would bring a halt to the fighting right away, open the door to a ceasefire, support the idea of conversations beginning immediately over the conditions that would have to be instituted and prevail to prevent the present situation between Israel and Iran from growing into a region-wide catastrophic conflict that nobody can stop. We have basically gone well beyond the point of what I would call easy no return, but I don't think we are yet at the point where were we able to bring people together that would be totally impossible. And so that would, in my view, be something of interest here. And I've thought that for some time the Council should be living up to its mandate rather than articulating serious bilateral and other differences over the current range of conflicts in the Middle East and Balkans.
And in terms of how the US sees these developments the last 24 hours, I mean, we've been putting this to some of our other guests today as well, but I mean, it sounded like the US Secretary of State was trying to distance the US from those attacks carried out by Israel, saying we weren't involved, these were unilateral attacks. Do you think the US did tacitly, however, approve of what Israel did?
I can only guess, and I don't think a guess at the moment would be contributing to any kind of diplomatic effort or success. It is apparent that the U.S. apparently knew about the impending attacks, and it is apparent that the U.S. has continued to support Israel in large measure over reasons that have to do with the Hamas heavy attack on October 7th, the disastrous murder of 1,200 Israelis and so on. My view is that one massacre does not, in a sense, justify another, and the death toll in Gaza that went on after the October 7th attacks is nothing that anyone, I think, should be proud of claiming responsibility for.
Okay, and in terms of how you think the next couple of days will pan out, this is my last question to you. So, I mean, what are your predictions?
That's the big question now. Is the Security Council the place where we could begin to open the door? How will Russia and China look at this? Do they have a deep concern about proliferation? There have been evidences in the past they do. A effort to, in one way or another, slow down and, put it this way, incentivize the beginning of a negotiated outcome to these problems rather than continued waves of attacks, drone waves, missile attacks, aircraft attacks, would be, I think, wildly supported by a large number of people all around the world and would be an extremely helpful step to move conditions ahead. And we ought to be putting ourselves in the van, in the main centerpiece of the effort to get this done. It is in our interest not to have a catastrophic conflict in the Middle East that may in one way or another threaten nuclear use, or at least make that more likely, or the uncertainty make that more likely, all of which we have in one way or another thought about over a long period of years and created deterrence. Now's the time to use deterrence. Diplomacy is a very strong, put it this way, backup to deterrence, a very strong invigorator of deterrence, a very strong involvement of how and in what way deterrence can move itself forward in the international community to take over from confusion, chaos, and catastrophe.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you sharing that with us. Thomas Pickering, former US
Good
ambassador
to be
to
with you.
Israel.
Thanks.
Thank you. That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again on Monday for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.